At the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 495, offered by Mr. King of Iowa. Add at the end of the bill the following. Section 6, biannual report to Congress.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And listening to the debate here, and I know there's a disagreement on what kind of recidivism that we have and what the impact is on crime in the United States when we import people from high crimes countries. And I was looking at the numbers that show 227,149 unaccompanied alien children have been brought into the United States from these countries in the past 6 years. So one wonders how many crimes were committed by that universe of people that come from the most violent places in the world. And what this amendment does is requires every 6-month increment a report from the Attorney General on each crime for which an unaccompanied alien child is charged or convicted during the previous 6-month period following their release from the custody of U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And many of them are being released on, on their own recognizance. And I heard the chairman's statements on the violent crime rates within the countries that many of them are coming from. And I just summarized some of that data that I heard from the chairman, and it comes out this way. That shocking number in El Salvador, 93.09 violent deaths per 100,000, shocking, until I looked up the data that was delivered to this committee from former member and stellar member Randy Forbes of Virginia, who had gone to New Orleans to examine the violent death rate and the crime rates in New Orleans. This was post-Katrina. And there, the violent death rate, that was actually characterized as a homicide rate in New Orleans, was 90 per 100,000.
Mr. Chairman.
Very close to the 93.09 out of El
Gentleman
Salvador.
from Louisiana, seek recognition.
We just had a conversation about this. We're going to lose all civility in this committee if he thinks it's appropriate to compare New Orleans to Guatemala. Now,
the gentleman will suspend. The gentleman from Iowa has the right to make a statistical comparison between two locations.
well, you're comparing the people in the locations. That'd be like me comparing them to somebody in the Klan. I don't have a basis to do that.
When the gentleman has completed his remarks, I'll be happy to recognize the gentleman from Louisiana to make his arguments to the contrary, but he's entitled to make those remarks.
We just had a conversation about civility in this United States Congress. Now, I wear badges of bipartisanship because I actually take up and stand up for principles. I am not going to sit here and let him do that. Now, the people I love, the people I respect, and I live in New Orleans. Now, if the gentleman persists on it, then let's go in the back and have the conversation about New Orleans. But I am not going to sit here and do that. And if it takes walking across over there, then I'm prepared to do that too. But it's not appropriate, it's insensitive, and it's nothing more than traditional white privilege of let me criticize a minority city. Now, take it how you want. I'm telling you how I feel.
Look, the gentleman is entitled to express how he feels, but so is the gentleman from Iowa. And these remarks...
And words and actions have consequences, and we just saw it days ago. And we promised to do better because words have consequences.
Words have consequences, so do statistics, and so do arguments. This is the place to do it under the rules of the House. And under the rules of the House, he is entitled to proceed. The gentleman from Iowa may resume his arguments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd suggest that if the gentleman can't participate in an open discussion on this, then it might be better for one of us, and that would be particularly you, the gentleman from Louisiana, then to remove himself from the room, but he can't restrain himself. And reclaim my time. I'm simply reciprocating on this regard, but I'll go back to the data, and I will not be intimidated by this kind of thing. It's important that we look at data. In fact, it's more important that we look at the data than it is we listen to the rhetoric that surrounds the data. And these are bodies that are going to the morgue, Mr. Chairman. That's something that is offensive to me. And it's gone on in this country for a long, long time. And I've listened to these debates about the violent death rate in the countries that the people are coming in that are unaccompanied alien minors coming into the United States. I've listened to that death rate, and I've heard the members on the other side of the aisle say we've got to get them out of those countries. We've got to get them out of there because they're subjected to these high death rates. 93.09 in El Salvador, 70.66 per 100,000 in Guatemala, Venezuela, 47, Trinidad, Tobago, 43, Belize, 43, Lesotho, there's one outside of what's south of the Rio Grande River, 41.9. Colombia, back in there, number 7 in the world, 37. Honduras, number 8 in the world, 36. And then Haiti, 35. Panama, 34. Brazil, 30. You take the top 13 countries in the world, and 11 of them are not just south of the Rio Grande, they're south of Mexico. And we're talking about having sympathy in our hearts to remove people from those violent areas. All right, that's a point. That's statistically, I recognize that statistic. But you also must recognize the statistic of the violent death rates in this inner cities in the United States of America, of which New Orleans is not the highest anymore. In fact, that 90 has gone down substantially in New Orleans since Katrina. And that's a legitimate point, too, that I intended to make in the flow of this conversation. But East St. Louis is not so good with that 70 per 100,000. St. Louis itself, 49.99. Call that 50. This city here in Washington, D.C. used to be 53 violent deaths per 100,000. There was a time when it was safer for my wife to be, safer for someone who was a typical citizen, ununiformed in Iraq, than it was to live in Washington, D.C. That's the data we're talking about here. When's this committee going to come around to reducing the crime rates within our inner cities? Within Detroit, for example, and the ranking member knows, I've gone to Detroit, I've met with the chief of police, I'm very impressed with him. I think they're making some good moves there, and they've dropped down from number 1 to 2nd or 3rd in the nation. It's a long ways to go where Detroit needs to get, but we need to have those kind of conversations.
Well, the gentleman
we
yields?
need to be, I won't yield, and we need to get to the point where we understand the real data. That's what this amendment is about, is the real data on the recidivism rate. These kids coming in here, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, if they're telling, and it may not be telling the truth on that, prime gang recruitment age. Young men, 81% prime gang recruitment age. We need to know the data, Mr. Chairman, and I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I'd yield back the balance of my time, even though I lost a minute or so in the exchange.
Time of the gentleman has